You know, normally at the end of these things, they go through a bunch of different things that are, you know, thanking people, and I'm sure that we're going to do that again here. But one of the things that sometimes gets forgotten is to thank you guys out there for dealing with such an exhausting and grueling schedule. And I want you all to start off by giving yourself a round of applause, actually, for making it. Even today, I think that you're meeting a pretty grueling schedule for your last day. So congratulate you on that. And I want to assure you that this was not intended to exhaust you like at a cult meeting or something like that, and then give you the grape juice on your way out. But I hope that you find these issues, you know, stimulating. We'll find some of the lectures to be things that might inspire you for further inquiry. And I think that last point is really sort of the real characteristic of contemporary Austrian economics is not so much, it's an invitation to inquiry. That's what we're hoping to sort of encourage here. It's not at all a presentation of a position as much as an invitation to inquiry. This is a way to pursue these kind of ideas. There's a variety of ways in which people are doing this nowadays, working on concepts like spontaneous order and invisible hand explanations. You can think about someone like Peyton Young, wrote a book called Individual Strategy and Social Structure, which is trying to use, you know, various different computer simulation approaches. You can think about Rob Axtell, who's with the Center for Social Complexity and the Santa Fe Institute, who's trying to talk about dynamic exchange processes. He has a wonderful economic journal essay on the difference between the exchange paradigm and the allocational paradigm, which if you go back and read Hayek or Jim Buchanan, you can see them making the same arguments. And now Axtell is trying to build societies from the bottom up and simulate those models. So there's a variety of ways in which people are trying to do these different things. Roger Garrison and Larry can tell you about various different efforts at empirical study of Austrian business cycle theory that have been and that are people are trying. So about an invitation to inquiry, trying to take, to a large extent, I would suggest, it's my own unique reading, that those 10 propositions that I listed on the board and the way in which people explore them in modern economics. And so it's a very, you know, very exciting period. If I was a betting man, which I am, I'd bet on the future of Austrian economics. I don't know if it will be called Austrian economics. I bet on the future of economics. And that good economics in the future will in fact be an economics which recognizes, you know, time and ignorance and dynamic adjustment processes and things like that. And so I think that we're in a good period of time, and I hope that you guys strap in and join the adventure. So I wanted to end with just some things, and then we're going to have an open sort of dialogue with the people here. But I wanted to make a few things about how do scientific movements grow. Since we're trying to actually grow a scientific movement, scientific movements grow in with three things. They have to have ideas. The ideas have to be good. You can't have a growing scientific movement if you have really bad ideas. Okay, you can't build a bridge with bubble gum, right? And so you need to have really good ideas. You need to have funding. All right, you don't have funding, you can't get off the ground. And you need to have positions. That is, positions for people to actually make a living while doing that scientific work. Right? No scientific paradigm gets off the ground. Now, a lot of times when people think about this stuff, they give you examples from the 19th century. But they don't give you examples from the 20th century when the professionalization of these disciplines took place. And so, you know, two of the things that I want to emphasize here on this ideas, funding, and positions. In fact, I would argue that in the history of modern Austrian economics, we've had the ideas. We actually had a fair amount of funding, but for a long period of time, we didn't have positions. But now we do, and that's one of the things that you do when you think about, you know, looking to see how young people are advancing in the discipline, see where it is that they get jobs, how they advance in those jobs, where they end up, you know, and that kind of stuff. Those things matter. But what I want to point to you is the sort of nature of scientific processes. Michael Polanyi, who's one of my favorite philosophers of science, he wrote a book, an essay called The Republic of Science. And he's trying to describe how it is that science works as a spontaneous order to advance the growth of knowledge. It's a competitive process in which knowledge is advanced, but that there is a kind of a tension that's involved. And what he argues is that the first thing is that the topics that you have to work on have to have an intrinsic value to others in the scientific community. If they don't have an intrinsic value to others in the scientific community, they have a good reason not to pay attention to you. They just don't care. Like, why should I care about that topic? So one of the things with selecting topic choice is you have to be part of an ongoing conversation. The second thing is that you have to meet a plausibility test. All right? That your ideas have to, in fact, be plausible to those who don't agree with them. Right? Otherwise, they're not going to pay attention to you. And then the third thing, which is the tension part, is your ideas have to be creative. That is something that they hadn't thought about before, which cuts against intrinsic value and plausibility. But that's the tension. So everyone, right? But that's how science progresses. If you come along and you work on topics that no one cares about and you have wildly ridiculous explanations, no one will even know whether or not you're creative or not. They'll just think you're a kook. So, if you keep in mind of this, by the way, this will cut against me somewhat, but one of my favorite scenes of scientific exchange is in the movie Splash. Does anyone remember the movie Splash? Just like two people in here? No? All right, well, it's a Tom Hanks movie. All right, look it up. And in Tom Hanks, what he does is, it's when he's young, and a young actor, before, Castaway or Saving Private Ryan or anything like that. And in the movie, he plays a character who discovers or comes across a mermaid and falls in love with her. It's played by Daryl Hannah. And there's a scientist in the movie named Bloomberg who became convinced early on in his life that there was mermaids. And he eventually outs the mermaid, by dousing her with water when Tom Hanks is out on a date with her, and then her, fins come out and everything. And so the National Science Association scoops her up and starts doing tests on her, all right? And he questions, the scientist who was always chasing after the mermaid, questions to the doctor in charge the ethical treatment of this mermaid. And the guy says to him, listen, I never considered you part of my community. Why don't you run along now and find a unicorn? And a large part, I've always thought this is what happened to a lot of Austrian types, right? Is that, so for example, arguments that dismiss business cycle theory, that's like the unicorn, right? In the heyday of real business, yes, you found this business cycle, but, go find a unicorn now or whatever. And so I think that what you have to look at is this issue of this tension between intrinsic value, plausibility, and creativity. It's the way science progresses, for good or bad. Scientists can't pay attention to every idea that's put forward because an infinite array of ideas are put forward. So you have to somehow be able to do this. Kuhn talks about this in The Essential Tension. And what's very important about Kuhn is his idea about paradigm shifts gets misused all the time, especially by crackpots. Because the idea is, I'm going to be a paradigm change over here, and then all of a sudden, we're going to work on this paradigm, and then there's going to be anomalies, and then there's going to be this shift, and all of a sudden we're going to move to this other world. That's not at all the way scientific revolutions take place, and Kuhn was explicit that that's not how it takes place. The scientific revolution has to take place by an insider, plausible and intrinsic value, right, who challenges the existing status quo with their creativity and overturns it. It's an insider who makes an outsider claim. Never an outsider making an outsider claim. They just get rejected. Okay? So you have to sort of work with inside of this. Scientific movements grow this way, and it's about ideas, funding, and positions. And unless you're working in this community, you're not going to get the positions. You're going to be told to go search for another unicorn. Okay? And you can continue to publish, and everyone thinks I'm Insano Home Journal of Economics. That's from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, for those of you who don't know that reference. Okay, trying to be hip with the pop culture thing. All right. So how is it that scientific movements fade away? You might have already guessed this from what I was saying before. In the most powerful book, I think, written on this is Randall Collins' The Sociology of Philosophies. And it's a big, thick book published by Harvard. And what it does is it goes through the history of philosophical movements and shows which ideas gain ascendancy, which ones fade away. It's an extremely important book. And the three things that are characteristic of movements that die out are, first and foremost, a focus on individuals, not ideas. Right? That we're about the individual, not about their ideas. The second one is that they engage in insulating stratagems. They try to constantly wall themselves off against the rest of their scientific community. And third, they never want to have confusion or fear of failure by trying out a new idea. So they become intrinsically intellectually conservative. It's always backward-looking rather than forward-looking. Because the march into the unknown is, of course, risky. So you were talking about the kind of model that you want to build, right? You don't actually know if it's going to work out yet. You have a hunch. You have to go out there, right, and do that. Right? You have good reasons to maybe believe that those things are there. That's how science progresses. But if we lived in a movement where if you went out there, we said, oh, you're a deviant, your head's cut off, you know, right? That would create a failure. So that becomes insulating. And so you might be able to see how it is that these three things, like for example in Collins' book, are self-reinforcing. I focus on the individual, I understand and pine over his text, I insulate myself as the one focused on those texts, and we never deviate from those texts, right? That's how movements die. Movements succeed by being unafraid to make an error. And that means that you also have to be disciplined when you make an error. So, harsh criticism, right? So, where's the situation that the Austrians find themselves in modern economics? So what I would argue, the depiction that I would suggest is that this path, these lines, represent the sort of path of economics from Adam Smith to today. Okay? So we start in a world, so this is a four, quadrant model, all right, where we have natural language all the way up to formal language, universal statements to particular statements. Okay? So the old argument was that we could state in words only that we know every island is its own universe. Right? There's no such thing as universality. All there is particulars over here. Or what we can do is we can derive universal propositions using deductive logic, all right, in natural language. And so that was the old battle between, theory and historicism. And then in the 20th century, what we did was we marched up this line under the idea that treating an idea formally meant that you were treating it rigorously. Right? So the big debate that Austrians have with a lot of their economists is they don't buy the proposition that formalism necessarily equals rigor. They believe that you can be rigorous, right, in argument without necessarily putting in an axiomatic or a mathematical representation. But the idea of mathematical representation was very attractive because what was the big battle that was going on? It was battles over the ambiguity in words. So if you use the same word to mean two different things or different words to mean the same thing, you're going to be confused. Mathematics eliminates that. But as has been pointed out by many people, and this it will lead us way too far, so I'm just going to say it very quickly, what mathematics gave us was syntactic clarity, but not necessarily semantic clarity. Okay? And for economics, for human sciences, you need semantic clarity, not syntactic clarity. So we get to Samuelson, Arrow, Hahn, and De Breu, and my professor, Tom DiLorenzo, some of you know, he used to draw it up on the board and then he would refer to it as the, oh crap theory, right? I look at the board and I go, oh crap, the world isn't like that. And the problem with most economists that were in this market failure theory mindset was, oh crap, the world isn't like that. We need to use government to make the world more like that, rather than, oh, my theories are messed up, right? And so what happened was in the move away from this, we started to develop market failure theory, information economics, whatnot. Parallel with that is also a movement of new institutionalism, including Austrianism in the 1970s, Kersnerian entrepreneurship and whatnot, okay? And so this movement comes along down on that axis. But as we moved more and more here, one of the things that we realized is that we were dealing with more and more ad hoc assumptions. So economics had a counter-reaction. One of the things is that economists in this period from here to here could not cope with the idea of multiple equilibria. The models had to be single exit models. All right? But as we move further and further down here, the difficulty of deriving single exit theorems became more and more obvious. And as a result, we had to intellectually come to grips with the idea of multiple equilibria. And to be honest with you, once we bought that, economic theory bought the farm. Right? Because we lost this idea of the causal nature of economics. The very reason, there was good reasons why people feared the sort of multiple equilibria idea. And we end up with what I refer to as formalistic historicism. Meaning I can prove any damn thing I want for any particular situation using the most formal mathematics possible. All right? For those of you who are in graduate school, the classic case of this is Mascalel's paper on capital theory. He's a very creative guy, very, like that, and he developed figured out a solution concept that spelled the word Joan Robinson. Okay? Just like, von Neumann. Von Neumann's wife, you read this book by I think it's Poindexter. Do you know the book on game theory? Do you know the name of the guy who wrote it? The sort of the game theory book. It's an old book about the history of game theory. Anyway, his wife always complained to him, von Neumann, and she said, John, stop. I will listen to you again when you can demonstrate to me that one of your equilibrium looked like an elephant. And so one of the things that they do in the book is they show a solution concept, and he made it look like an elephant. These guys are very bright. They can prove any goddamn thing they want, using whatever mathematics that they want. And so, for example, I implore all of you to read Sam Peltzman's review of the Handbook of Industrial Organization. And what he points out in the Handbook of Industrial Organization is we used to have a theory that was general and then tested. So you think about the old Chicago learning versus the old structure time and I/O. Right? There was actually an argument there. And what Peltzman says is now, if you read the new Handbook on Industrial Organization, there's no longer this general theory in which we can debate. All we have is examples. Formal example after formal example. We've lost the ability to assess between the different examples. So this is what I'd call formalistic historicism. Now, if I'm right, it's a hypothesis, right? This means that there's some implications. One of which is beating up on Schmoller is no longer a cool thing to do. He's dead. The arguments for Schmoller, so someone saying to you, you're a Schmollerite, doesn't go anywhere, right? It's not, saying that Ludwig Lockman, for example, is a historicist. It's silly, I think. All right? It's not the live debate. What are we doing with Lockman's ideas? Where are we going with them? It's not the thing. To say the economics of time and ignorance is a historicist tract, I think it doesn't really get at what the issue is. The battle with general competitive equilibrium is neither dead nor alive. Okay, so the Austrian sort of argument, I'm leading a group this fall and through the year, which will be on formal theories of the market process. You know, Franklin Fisher, all these different kind of things like that. I happen to really like that stuff. I was interested in that when I was a graduate student. I've maintained an interest of it all the way through. I published a 2-volume reference work on it. But it's not a way to get ahead in the profession. It's not one of the topics that's intrinsically valuable. You could be plausible with it, but it's not currently intrinsically valuable. That doesn't mean it won't be in the future. It's just currently not. But the battle that's currently going on is the battle with formalistic historicism, I would argue, hasn't been engaged. And that's the world we live in. So here's what I'm saying. Mises, Menger, Mises, and Hayek, they dealt a lot with this world. All right, that's over. Let's put that puppy to bed. All right? Hayek and Kerzner, they dealt a lot with that world. Okay? Put a fork in it. Okay? What hasn't happened is the engagement between here and here. And that's the world that modern economics has existed in since 1990. Okay? So what are you going to do about it? Most of the debates still talk about this, still talk about this, don't talk about this. So that's up to, I would put that as an intellectual challenge to you guys to actually engage that. That's the world of economics that we live in my estimation, and therefore that's where the exciting action is at. That's where we're going to have to make our arguments. So, we have to be engaged professionally, the essential tension again. You have to accept the standards of scientific success of the game you are playing. You decided, this is, by the way, again, directed at PhD students, you decided to become a professional economist. When you wrote and went in and became a professional economist, or Peter becomes a professional philosopher, or if people here become professional political scientists, they accept the standards that that discipline sets for itself. I used the example here the other day about, I grew up loving the New York Yankees. Still do. I also played a wiffle ball game every single day with my neighbor across the street, imitating the teams that the Yankees were going to play. I did a very mean Bobby Mercer imitation, but I could also do Horace Clarke, and I also knew how to, and I'll do them for you right now if you want. Bobby Mercer had this really cool role. I loved it. And I was pretty damn good at wiffle ball. It would be a huge mistake for me to sit there and say, hey, I could pitch for the Yankees because I threw that wicked screw curveball with my wiffle ball because I knew how to put the 2 fingers over the wiffle ball and then throw it and strike the guy out. Wiffle ball is different from baseball. When you sign up into Major League Baseball, you don't go back to your manager after you strike out and say, but man, I hit really good with wiffle ball. Right? It's you struck out. And if you sign up to be a professional economist, you want to maximize the number of readers in the highest profile outlets that you can. Don't try to switch the standards. We all want to publish in the AER, not the RAE. That's your goal. But you want to do it on your own terms. Right? So that's the issue that you have to do. So that means that you have to compete on the margins where you have a comparative advantage. The example that I like to give to highlight this is many years ago when Shaquille O'Neal was still with the Lakers and they were winning all their championships, there used to be a TV show that I loved called The Best Damn Sports Show. And Tom Arnold, right, if you might remember him, right, he's a sort of a schleppy actor type. He was one of the hosts on The Best Damn Talk Show. And what he did was he invited Shaquille O'Neal in. They had just won the world championship. And he says to Shaquille O'Neal, I'll beat you in a game of basketball. And Shaquille O'Neal laughed and said, yeah, Tom, what are you going to do? He's in his dress clothes, like that. And he says, come on, we're going to play. And they wheeled out one of those portable basketball hoops. All right? And then Arnold says, I get to pick the rules. And what Arnold did was he went all the way to the other side of the stage, and he says, 1 shot each. And he threw the shot up, and he banked it in. Now Shaq, right, 7-foot behemoth of a man, when he was a kid, broke his wrist. which is one of the reasons why he can't bend his wrist back to shoot a free throw. Right? He's 7 foot, he shoots about 1%. Right? From there, he's like, boom, like this, because it's like a shot put. No one can do it. So now he's 30 feet away. Tom Arnold runs around the stage. I beat Shaq in basketball. What you have to be is Tom Arnold. You find the margin in which you can compete. Even if you are not as teched up and as skilled as other people, you find that margin that makes your skills better than theirs. To put it in economic terms, Avnish Dixit wrote a book called Transaction Cost Theory of Politics. Avnish Dixit is a very smart man. I cannot beat Avnish Dixit in overlapping generation models. He will kick my butt, just like as if Tom Arnold tried to wrestle with Shaq in the post. But when it comes to political economy, Dixit's not quite as good. I might be better by taking Dixit into the field of political economy and then trying to compete with him there. He has an absolute advantage on me in terms of brains, but I might have a comparative advantage on him in terms of political economy. Maybe. But it's a hell of a lot better than competing with him in formal models, okay, that he comes up with. So, work in those areas that are often omitted by your scientific peers. All right? But yet also those areas that they care about. So they have to be areas that they don't work in, but they find interesting. If they don't work in it and they find it not interesting, when you work in it, you're not going to be able to run around the stage. Hey, I won. Because they're going to say, like, what is this, a crazy person again, right? Intrinsic value, plausibility, creativity. You'll be a crazy nut. But what you want to be is they work in an area that they think is interesting. Development economics. Why the hell is Africa so poor? And they don't look at self-governance. So you come along and you say, for example, Dixit's most recent work is on the laws of lawlessness. What the hell happens, right, in, that's your title, right? What's his title? His title's the same. Lawlessness and Economics, okay? And so, sorry about that, Pete. Right. So, you know, Dixit now knows that there's failed and weak states. Rajan, IMF staff paper, refers to it as assume anarchy. He says most economic models start with the assumption of enforceable and exchangeable private property rights. Well, what about the economics of worlds where they don't have enforceable and exchangeable property rights? So now you work in those areas. See, that way you become a productive input into the scientific production process of others within the profession. That's how you become, you're bringing your own unique creativity, you're raising your little Austrian hand in the conversation of economic, profession, but you're actually trying to make an inroad. And then finally, I would say you have to have a dogged commitment. And the best examples of this are guys like Kerzner, but also guys like Doug North, Vernon Smith, Jim Buchanan, Elinor Ostrom. What do I mean by this dogged commitment yet professional engagement? Let me use Jim Buchanan as example, or Vernon Smith is even a better example. When Vernon Smith decided to try to use experiments to do economics, the use of experiments in economics was rejected by the vast majority of economists. Vernon did not go away and hide. He just kept doing experiments and presenting them to economists. Look at this insight. Look at this insight. Look at this insight. He went from Purdue to Arizona. He had a chance individually to go to Harvard. He turned it down to go to Arizona because he could bring his whole lab in Arizona to do experiments. Right? People said to him, Vernon, how can you go to Arizona? That's not a top-ranked department. And Vernon had the chutzpah to say, any department that will hire me is by definition a top-ranked department. All right? Jim Buchanan, all right, was teaching at UCLA. He left UVA because Gordon Tullock couldn't get promoted. All right? He left UVA to go teach at UCLA. He was teaching out at UCLA, all settled in. Okay? One of his students got Gordon Tullock to move to VPI. One of Buchanan's former students. They got Tullock to move there. Then they said, hey, Jim, why don't you come here? We'll build a center and pick up where we left off at UVA and build a public choice center. Make it even more explicit about what it is, non-market decision making. Buchanan left a cushy job at UCLA to move to VPI, which was in Roanoke. Right? Close to Arkansas, you know, One-Tooth-Lil or whatever, right? And, you know, he moved down there to VPI to build a program. And they built a program, and then he won the Nobel Prize, similar to that. Lynn Ostrom, right, when she went out, she couldn't even get hired. Indiana would not hire her. The only job they would give her was the graduate admissions director during the height of the Vietnam War. She had to teach a 4-4 teaching load, still publish, and have the fate of 800 kids a year, because at that time there was a college deferment plan, and if you didn't get into the program, you had to go fight in Vietnam. So it was a kind of emotionally draining thing. She stuck to her guns, worked on her work, and ended up, again, Nobel Prize. What do these people have in common? They stick to their guns about their paradigmatic points, but yet they refuse to not be part of the conversation in the profession. They do it in a way that they keep inside the conversation rather than getting excluded from it. So, if you think about that as a sort of a strategy set, remember, constantly think, how can I be a productive input into the production process of other scholars in this discipline? And I'm going to bring to bear as my skills as a productive input the ideas of Mises and Hayek. And I'm going to help out other researchers that are working on areas because they're omitting the interesting ideas of Mises and Hayek. And I'm going to bring those to bear on those conversations that they care about. Well, what are some of those conversations? I'm just going to give like a few here, but those areas are things that we've talked about all this week. The areas of entrepreneurial theory of the market process. We need more people working on the market process theory. All right? On the economics of relative price adjustments that guide entrepreneurs so that markets move towards equilibrium. The process by which equilibrium emerges rather than the equilibrium state. Rationality and behavioral economics. Right? So what role does rationality play in economics? What do we mean by rationality? All right? How does behavioral economics sort of impact our ability to understand? Many years ago, a man named Hans Albert, who's a German sociologist, put the following challenge forward to the new institutional crowd. He said, neoclassical economics will never repair its institutional deficiency until it repairs its behavioral deficiency. I don't think that we've fully come to grips with that proposition yet. All right, when Lynn Ostrom wrote her presidential address for the American Political Science Association, the title of it is A Behavioral Approach to the Rational Choice Theory of Collective Action. All right? That's a long-winded way, but if you think about it and try to parse out all those different parts, it's a very interesting way. She's not denying the rational choice theory. The argumentative structure of the theory still stays, but can you treat it as if these individuals are, perfectly rational or hyper-rational agents? And what actually is involved in these things. Vernon Smith's Nobel Prize address, which I highly recommend all these, is contrast constructivist and ecological rationality. The easiest way for me to give a quick postcard of that thing is that rationality is omnipresent. The manifestations of rationality are context dependent. That's exactly what Mises argues. Mises says you're never irrational. Man is always rational. But the manifestation of rationality is going to depend on the institutional context within which we make our decisions. Tonight, after you have a few things to drink, you should talk to Pete about animal trials. Because they were efficient, or ordeals. Right? They were rational given the context within which the people engage in them. That's what Pete's trying to show. If I just said to you, hey, stick your arm in this boiling cauldron of water, right, you might say to yourself, hell, that's kind of weird. I'm not going to do that. But if you change the context and you fully specify that context, it might actually be not only rational, but efficient to extract the information. That's a fascinating research program in economics. Macroeconomic, let me say something about that real quick, and hopefully it will embarrass the two of them. But I actually think that economics should come in two different forms. Economics is exceedingly fun. It's the sexiest subject in the world. When I teach basic economics, the very first lecture I give is on the economics of dating. And I ask all the young ladies in the class how many married the first guy they ever dated. No one raises their hand. And I say, well, that's because, the marginal benefits decline over time, marginal costs increase over time, and we figure out the optimal level of dates. And then I say, you're all away for college, right? How many of you have a boyfriend back at home? And, somebody raised their hands. I say, well, actually, what's happened now is the marginal costs of dating someone else have declined, so you're going to date other people. That's called the high school hookup, right? So you're all going to break up with your boyfriends pretty soon, blah, 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 and all these things like that. So economics should be exceedingly fun. When you walk out of an economics class, you should say, God, this is the most fun I've had in school in the history of my life. Right? You should laugh when you're reading economics. It's like, oh my God, how funny is this? Okay? All right? How illuminating. It can understand all the things in the world, all these things like that. All right? When you read Pete's stuff over pirates or anything like that, it's hilarious. Not hilarious in the sense like, how could an idiot say something like that? It's like hilarious because it's actually completely coherent. The back of his book has a syllabus as if it was written by Blackbeard. It's like unbelievably hilarious to read. And as a result, you learn economics because it's fun to learn it and read it. That's why reading P.J. O'Rourke is fun, right? That's why reading, Bastiat, the candlestick makers petitioning the government for unfair competition about the sun, that's hilarious. It's like, right? It's like a satire that's a joke. H.L. Mencken once said, you can either laugh or you can cry. I choose to, scoff and laugh at a world, right? This is, economists can do that. So economics should be exceedingly fun. But it also is a subject which is deeply serious. Lives are at stake. Read the last paragraph of civilization is at stake. All right? And so you should also understand that not only is it the funnest subject in the world, it's also the most deadly serious subject. You can the fate of nations hang on the balance of that. And that's like what Chris is arguing in terms of like war. What is a more drastic thing than the economics of war? And the number of lives that are sacrificed under a false belief that you could somehow bring liberty to people at the point of a gun. All right? And so you have both exceedingly fun economics and exceedingly serious economics. And you should strap in and go on the ride. All right? Because there's nothing like it. All right, so now I'm back to more serious stuff, right? Which is macroeconomics. I'm not a macroeconomist. I made fun of macroeconomics in my first thing. I respect macroeconomics. I'm not a macroeconomist because I'm not good at it. Right? I'm Larry White's Shaq, and I would be like Tom Arnold, and Larry would say, here's the ball, you can't get it, right? And so I noticed that, early on when I was a kid, I read Larry's book when I was a college student, my last time, 84 or whatever, and before I started graduate school, I have all little notes in it to this day, and all these notes, I was completely blown away by it. But I also realized that I was reading, a master in it. It's the same thing with Roger Garrison. Steve, he's more delusional, so he decided he thought he could do that. And so he tried to work in those. I read those guys, and I'm like, yeah, I agree with that. And so I'm not, wasn't going to do anything. But these are, obviously, the crisis has created all these great opportunities for this. And I think capital theory, again, economists aren't talking about like Bombavric anymore, but they are talking about things like irreversible investment and other kinds of ideas which capital theory can help us understand. And finally, this is the area that I have mainly concentrated all my energies on, and it's about transition studies, the failure of socialism, and the ability of self-governance to operate. And you see that in the reflection of a lot of the work that gets done at GMU. I mean, we care about this stuff, the selection of our mechanisms, the selection of the cases that we work on, all of these kind of things. It's a ripe area. Remember what I said. Rajan has a paper called Assume Anarchy. It's not anarchy research as defined by like David Friedman and Murray. It's research in the positive political economy of anarchy. Systems which don't have states that are functioning. All right? And then how it is that you do economics in that world. So what I want to sort of say to you is, this is a quote from Bastiat, which says, where is Steve, by the way? Okay. What's going on, Steve, with the... Okay. Remember, Bastiat. By the way, Bastiat has a lot of apocryphal, quotes. If goods and services don't cross borders, soldiers certainly will. People haven't been able to find that. And so I used to quote for years this quote from Bastiat, which says that never worry about a harsh criticism, always worry about a weak defense. And people then came up to me and said, I can't find that at all in Bastiat. So I said to my class, I'll give $100 to anyone who will search all of Bastiat and find this. And I didn't think anyone would, because I thought it was just like the other one. And I said, and if you can't find it, I'm going to start using it as me, which I was hoping to do, because then I would say, people say it's Bastiat, but it's really a Boettke. There's a B, it's close, right? And let's just start saying this. But then this young lady at George Mason, who's like a force of nature, Leah, she actually hired out people. She said, she's was a student of Pete Leeson, so she figured this out. She says, for $100, I can hire someone for $10. I can hire another person, and then she hired a labor force to start working, and she could still pocket the money. And in less than a day, she found the quote for me. All right, it's in Economic Sophisms and whatnot. And this is how it goes. It says, the worst thing that can happen to a good cause is not to be skillfully attacked, but to be ineptly defended. And I think that motto is probably the most important motto for young Austrians to adopt. Because the biggest problem with young Austrians is not that they're Austrians, that's not the problem. And it's not that they're attracted to, strange ideas. It's that they have a hard time sorting between those who I might agree with and those who I think produced a good argument. A lot of people can produce statements that you agree with, but not necessarily good arguments why you agree with them. All right? And in fact, if the more you agree with them, the more their arguments are not that good, undermine your agreement, or should undermine your agreement. So you should always try to search for not an agreement, but the quality of argument. This is going to be a funny thing, but this hit me and dawned on me when I was in college. The first time it dawned on me was over tennis. And it was over the quality of writing, over reporting in tennis or whatever. So I was reading a very reputable source, but the reporting on the tennis match between Borg and McEnroe was not, I saw it, and they didn't get it. And then I had to go and find another source who I actually didn't. I was a total Borg crazy person. So I love Borg. I had a vested interest in the way they wrote the story. They didn't write it right. But then I went to another place which was the reporter was a total sycophant for McEnroe, but he actually understood tennis better and he could write a really good argument. And I was like, wait a minute, this guy actually reported better than this guy. He didn't miss it. And then it dawned on me, well, maybe that's true for other things. Okay, and that opened me up. It's funny how things happen like that, but that opened me up. So what you should do is always aspire to a higher and more sophisticated form of economic argument. Yet understand that simple economics is not necessarily simple-minded. Right? This is, again, a tension. You want to be more and more sophisticated, but sometimes, a downward sloping demand curve is pretty damn good. It's like, boop, don't do that. You can't, the demand curve doesn't do this, So I coached high school basketball for years. And, one of the things the cheerleaders say against opposing teams when a guy at star and the other team commits a foul, they always say, you can't do that, right? And, that's like a cheer, right? I feel sometimes, when you're doing economics, you should say that to Joe Stiglitz, you can't do that, like that, because he's violating the law of demand. right, in some of the statements that he says. So simple economics is not necessarily simple-minded. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be sophisticated in the way that you deal with these arguments after I just gave you a really stupid example. But anyway. So I want everyone else, the faculty, to come on up. But I think, just as they're coming on up, so come on up here, Pete and Chris. Guys. So I actually think that, come on up. So we have a tremendous opportunity, and I hope that this invitation to inquiry that you guys have been exposed to this week stimulates you, makes you think about things, and makes you want to go forward in your studies and work hard. So thank you very much for listening.